We continue now at the top of Daf Samach Beis and Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 62b. The Mishnah says, Gates sheyotza mitachas hapatish. If a spark comes from a hammer, a person is banging the hammer, and the spark flies out v'hizik and it causes damage, so chayiv, so the person who's striking the hammer is going to be chayiv. Gomol shayaton pishton, if a camel is loaded with flax, v'yavar b'Rosh Hashanah, and it passes through Rosh Hashanah, v'nichnas pishton l'soch hachanos, and the flax enters into a person's store, v'dalku b'neiru shel chanvani, and then it lights on fire by the candle of the storekeeper, v'hidlik esabir, and then it burns down a building, bal gomol chayiv, the owner of the camel is chayiv. Hiniach chanvani neiru mibachutz, if the storekeeper placed his candle outside of the store, hachanvani chayiv, so then the storekeeper is chayiv. Rabbi Yehuda says, B'ner Chanukah pater. If it was Ner Chanukah, then the storekeeper is pater because he's allowed to be placing the candle outside of his store. And the Gemara says, Amar Ravina Mishmei de Rava. Ravina says in the name of Rava, Shma minami de Rabbi Yehuda. We see from Rabbi Yehuda, Ner Chanukah mitzvah lahanicha b'soch asara. Then that when it comes to Ner Chanukah, it's a mitzvah to place it within 10 tvachim of the ground. Tisal gadaydach lamala me'asar. Because if you think you could place it above 10 tvachim, Amai Amar Rabbi Yehuda Ner Chanukah pater. Why would Rabbi Yehuda say that by Ner Chanukah the person is pater, the storekeeper is pater? Leimalei, he should say to him, meaning the person with the camel should say to the storekeeper, Havalei you should have put it high up above the area where the camel and the rider are. So therefore it really is your fault, even though it's Ner Chanukah. Rather, don't we see from here mitzvah lahanicha b'soch hasara, that it's a mitzvah to place it within 10 tvachim to the ground, and that's why the storekeeper is not responsible. And the Gemara says, Amri, they answer, lo, no. Really, I could tell you, afilu l'mala me'asar, it can be placed above 10 tvachim. My Amrit, what are you going to say? Boilach lanucha l'mala migamol v'rochva, that you should have placed it higher up above the camel and the rider. Kevan div mitzvah ka'asik, since he's doing a mitzvah, kuli hai lo atrachur rabbanon. The rabbanon didn't want to bother him so much with various requirements, so therefore he's not held responsible. We want to encourage people to do the mitzvah. Amar Rav Kahana said, Darash Rav Nasan bar Menyume, Mishmei de Rabbi Tanchum, Rav Nasan bar Menyume darshan in the name of Rabbi Tanchum, Ner Chanukah shehinicho l'mala me'esrim amma. If a Ner Chanukah is placed above 20 amos, psula kesukah uchamavoi, it's possible just like a sukkah. If the schach is above 20 amos, that's possible by a mavoi. If the korah, when they make an eruv, shitufei mavos and a mavoi, if the korah is above 20 amos, that is also a problem. The same thing is true when it comes to Ner Chanukah. And Rashi explains, L'mala me'esrim amma, if it's above 20 amos, lo chazu lo inchi. The idea is that people won't see it. It's too high up. V'lo mefarsum nisa, therefore it's not persume nisa. V'anan lefersume nisa. But and the whole point of it is persume nisa. That's why if it's too high, it's not going to be kosher. Hadron aloch hakones. We will return to you. Parak hakones. This is the end of the 6th parak of Meseches Bava Kamma. If you're enjoying these videos and this channel, please like, share, and subscribe, and take a look at the description box below to see how you can support this channel. And we will now begin the 7th parak of Meseches Bava Kamma. And the parak begins with the Mishnah, Meruba midas tashlumei kefal mi midas tashlumei arba v'chamisha. When it comes to paying kefal, that's talking about a ganav. Somebody who steals has to pay kefal. He has to pay double payment back. That goes beyond the halacha of paying 4 or 5 times the amount. If a person steals a shor or a seh and slaughters it or sells it, so he has to pay 4 or 5 times the amount. In that case, kefal goes further than arba v'chamisha in the following way. Shemidas tashlumei kefal, because when it comes to kefal, no heges bein bedavar sheyesh bo ruachaim uvein bedavar shein bo ruachaim. That applies whether it's something that is stolen that is like a live animal, or whether it's something that's not a live animal, meaning it applies to all kinds of geneva. However, umidas tashlumei arba v'chamisha, when it comes to paying 4 or 5 times the amount, eina no heges ela b'shor v'seh bilvad. That only applies if a person steals an ox or a sheep. Shenemar, as it says, ki yignov ish shor oseh utavacho umacharo. It says that if the person steals again an ox or a sheep and he slaughters it and he sells it, and the pasuk goes on to say again, ki yignov ish shor oseh utavacho macharo chamisha vakar yishalim tachas ashur. You have to pay 5 bakar for the shor. V'ar batzon tachas aseh. You have to pay 4 tzon tachas aseh. That's the idea of 4 or 5 times the amount. Again, the point is it only applies by a shor and a seh. It doesn't apply by other stolen items. And the Mishnah continues, Ein hagonev achar haganev mishalim tashlumei kefel. Let's say somebody steals, he's a ganev from another ganev, he doesn't pay kefel. V'lo hatoveach v'lo hamocher achar haganev. And similarly, somebody who slaughters or sells after the ganev mishalim tashlumei arba v'chamisha, he doesn't pay the 4 or 5 times the amount. And Rashi says, Ein hagonev achar aganav v'chulu. Again, if somebody steals from a ganav, he doesn't pay kefil. Techsiv hagonev mi beis ha'ish v'lo mi beis haganav. It says in the pasuk, it's stolen from the person. It doesn't say mi beis haganav, from the ganav. Therefore, that situation, he steals from a ganav, there is no kefil. And the Gemara says, "V'ilu midas tashlumei kefil noheges bein beganav bein betoin tainas ganav, umidas tashlumei arba v'chamisha eina noheges ela beganav bilvad lo katani." It does not say in the Mishnah that tashlumei kefil applies by a ganav and by a toin tainas ganav. A toin tainas ganav is somebody who is watching over an item. Let's say he's a shomer chinam. He tries to get out of responsibility by saying it was stolen from him, and it turns out it wasn't stolen from him. That's a toin tainas ganav. So the halacha is he has to pay kefil just like a ganav. That's toin tainas ganav. So it doesn't say in the Mishnah that if someone is toin tainas ganav, he pays kefil, but if someone is toin tainas ganav, let's say, and he slaughters or sells the animal, so then he doesn't pay arba v'chamisha. It doesn't say that in the Mishnah. And so the Gemara therefore says, Messiah leil Reb Chia bar Abba. That's a support for what Reb Chia bar Abba said, because Reb Chia bar Abba actually said that by toin tainas ganav there is arba v'chamisha. That's why it's not in the Mishnah. The Amar Reb Chia bar Abba, Reb Yochanan, because Reb Chia bar Abba said that Reb Yochanan said, toin tainas ganav b'pikorin, if somebody is toin tainas ganav by something that he's watching over, mishalim tashlumei kefil, he pays kefil, and tavachu machar, if he slaughters or sells the animal, mishalim tashlumei arba v'chamisha, then he pays the 4 or 5 times the amount, meaning the halach of arba v'chamisha does apply by toin tainas ganav, just like the halach of kefil applies by toin tainas ganav, and that's why the Mishnah doesn't say that meruba, the Mishnah doesn't say that kefil goes beyond arba v'chamisha by toin tainas ganav, because it actually does not, again, just like Reb Chia bar Abba says from Reb Yochanan. And the Gemara continues, Ika de Amri, some have a slightly different version of what we just said. Lema Messiah leil Reb Chia bar Abba. Let us say that our Mishnah supports Reb Chia bar Abba. To Amar Reb Chia bar Abba, Reb Yochanan, because Reb Chia bar Abba said that Reb Yochanan said, "Hatoin tainas ganav b'pikodim mishalim tashlumei kefil." If somebody is toin tainas ganav by a pikodim, he pays kefil. He pays the double payment. Tavachu machar mishalim tashlumei arba v'chamisha. And if he slaughters or sells, again the shor or the seh, so then he's going to pay either 4 or 5 times the amount. And to that, the Gemara says it's not necessarily a support for Reb Yochanan. Mi katani ein bein. It doesn't say in the Mishnah there is no other differences between kefil and arba v'chamisha. Meruba katani. It just says there's something additional by kefil. It could be there are other differences between them. Tana v'shayra could be the Tana of the Mishnah listed one distinction between kefil and arba v'chamisha, but maybe there are other distinctions. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said shemidas tashlumei kefil no heges v'chulu, that the idea of kefil that applies by all items, whereas by arba v'chamisha that only applies by a shor or a seh. And the Gemara says, Minohani mili, from where do we know that this is the case, that kefil applies to everything? The Tana Rabbanan, because the rabbis taught. Al kol devar pesha, it says, again, this is talking about kefil on anything. Klal, that's a generalization. Then it says, al shor, al chamor, al seh, al salma. It lists various items, shor, chamor, seh, and salma, an ox, and a donkey, and a sheep, and a garment. Prat, that's a specification. And then it says, al kol aveda, then it says, on any aveda. Chazru klal, that's a generalization. Klalu pratu chlal, if you have a klalu pratu chlal, iyatadon ela ke'ein haprat, then we say that it applies to all things that are similar to the item that is specified. Mahaprat meforish davar hametaltal v'gufo mamon, just like what is specified, it's something that is a movable object and it's worth money, it has monetary value. Af kol davar hametaltal v'gufo mamon, so too the halach of kefil applies to anything that's a movable object and it has monetary value. And the Gemara says, Yotzu karkos, that would exclude land. She'ein and metaltal, those are not, that land is not a movable object, so the Bryce excludes land. Yotzu avodim, that also excludes slaves. Shehukshu karkos, because slaves are compared to land. And Yotzu shtaros, that also excludes documents. She'afal pisha metaltal, and even though the shtar is a movable object, but ein gufon mamon, the actual item doesn't have monetary value. A shtar allows you to collect something with value. It's a document that you're going to use to collect something, but the actual shtar itself does not have monetary value. And finally, Yotza Hektish. Also, we exclude the concept of kefil is excluded by Hektish because Re'ehu Ksiv, because it's talking about a situation where it's between a person and his friend, not between a person and Hektish. But the Gemara continues. The animals that are specified in the pasuk, they're items that the carcass of the animal, the neveil of the animal, conveys tumah, whether you touch it or whether you carry it. v'masa, so too the halach of kefil will say only applies to animals where the nevela conveys tumah by touching it or by carrying it. Aval ofos lo, but let's say birds which do not convey tumah by touching or carrying, maybe the halach of kefil doesn't apply. But the Gemara says, can you even say this? But it's also written in the pasuk a garment. That's not even an animal. So how can you say it only applies to an animal where the nevela conveys tumah through maga and masa? A salma is not an animal at all. It can't only apply to that. And so the Gemara says, Amri, they say to that, they answer, Anan b'balei chayim kamrinan. We mean that within the category of living animals, maybe it's only animals that convey tumah through maga and masa. Ema b'balei chayim, davar shenivlasu matami b'maga uv'masa in, davar she'in nivlasu matami b'maga uv'masa lo. We should say that when it comes to living animals, again, only if the nevela is matami b'maga uv'masa, so then yes, the halach of kefil applies, but if the nevela is not matami b'maga uv'masa, so then the halach of kefil does not apply. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Gimel Amud Aleph.